this is just a short presentation on the importance of having implementation data to understand any outcome data that you might be collecting. So just a reminder about what implementation evaluation is. It's essentially a process evaluation and examines the degree to which a program, or it could be a set of activities, was implemented as it was intended. And then also it looks at the surrounding factors that supported or hindered the successful rollout. So without implementation data, how do we know if a change can be attributed to a program? This is very difficult to do if you don't understand what happened in the rollout of a program. So I'm just going to give a couple examples of leaps that may be quite common when you look at program evaluation. So the first example is, let's imagine there's a program that sends storybooks home to children with the goal of helping them learn some school readiness skills around literacy. So these storybooks go home before children enter kindergarten. They go home at regular intervals, and then we want to compare that group of children who received the storybooks to children who didn't. And we'll do that sometime in the first part of the kindergarten year, just to understand whether sending storybooks home is a helpful strategy. So let's say I just report out that the books were sent home, there were 10 books sent home, and the idea was children read the books with their parents, they spend time engaging in the books, and maybe there's a sheet of strategies parents can use by helping children identify some letters and look at the images and talk about the story itself. And then I find in kindergarten that those children who got the storybooks maybe were a bit more ready for literacy activities than children who didn't receive the storybooks. So that seems good. It seems like a reasonable assumption. But that's exactly all it is an assumption. Because without knowing what happened with those storybooks at home, I'm assuming that parents did those activities, that children picked up the books, that they enjoyed the books, that they engaged with the books. In order to really say that that made a difference, I need to actually know that. And the only way to know that is to ask the parents their opinions of what happened with those books by looking at what the hope was from the program developers. And I need to ask the children if they enjoyed the books, what they got out of the experience, of course in kid-friendly language and ways. So I need to roll it back and really understand how people interacted with those books at home. So if I have all that information and I know how many books they actually engaged with, some of the things they did, and how much time was spent, then when I see my outcome data, I can actually link back examples of why A should have led to B. In other words, why an activity makes sense that it would have resulted in an outcome. So very important. Just a second example, let's say there's a mental health support group and you're wanting people to feel more connected and supported as they perhaps struggle with some mental health challenges or concerns. So we could make the assumption that it's a support group, so surely it must be supportive, but that may not be the case. So if we find that in an outcome that people indicate that they actually feel less supported, or maybe they feel more supported, without knowing that background information about what happened in those groups, how many people attended, how they felt about the groups, what they got out of the groups, I can't really make that claim. Outcomes can be as a result of factors outside of a program. So I need to, again, just like the storybook example, I need to know how many groups people attended, how they felt about the groups. People that maybe dropped out, it would be important to try to loop back to those people to find out why they dropped out. Was it something that happened in the group? Was it another barrier? For example, the group was too hard to get to, the time was off, they needed childcare, but there was no childcare. So all this contributes to understanding our outcomes. So just as you're starting to plan your evaluation, and maybe you are wanting to measure outcomes, I encourage you right from the start to think about how you're going to measure implementation. So some things to incorporate would be, and we'll say this is like a program, your attendance data, your delivery dosage, that is, if there are 10 sessions and there's some learning activities in each session, how many of the learning activities are actually getting completed during those sessions. I would want to know the perspective of the facilitators and the participants. Did they learn from it? Did they enjoy it? I want to know if they found it useful, and what specifically did they find useful? Because maybe you have 3 big goals for your program, but maybe only one of them is being achieved. And if we know that only one of them is being achieved, we can look at why those other 2 areas are not being achieved. Maybe the content isn't strong enough. Maybe the activities aren't working for people. And then finally, I want to know if there's any negative consequences. So are people, for example, in a support group, actually feeling less supported? Maybe they're not feeling safe. So these are all important things to understand as you try to make sense of your outcome data, because you want to be able to link it back. So thinking of the big question, if you find an outcome, how would you answer, what proof do you have that your program actually impacts that outcome? So if you can go back to your implementation data and say, well, these activities were done in the program, participants indicated they found them useful, here's some examples, that's a strong case versus saying, well, they just said that on a questionnaire that they feel better, but if it's not linked to anything in your program, it could be something totally unrelated to your program. So really important stuff to incorporate in an evaluation. So this was a very short presentation, and this in itself could be an entire course, implementation evaluation, but just to start thinking about those seeds of aspects that you can weave into your evaluation is really important.